Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and thank you to all who have made our service so special so far. And as you know, this is a continuing series of unwished for services. We really want everybody here. And there's a lot going on, and I want to share a few important updates with you, and then share some words of Torah and concepts that, although they may be ancient in origin, are extraordinarily relevant today. So firstly, I want to wish those members of our congregation that are suffering and struggling special love and support and good health to all of you. And I want to say at the outset that that as a community, we are here for you. We're here for you in any which way, and there's no shame in talking about what's missing in your lives right now. Everybody is missing something. We have the ability to help you if you need food, if you're challenged, if you have to make choices between rent and food. Please let me know. We'll do whatever we can with our limited resources to help you, but we will help. I'm very pleased and proud to tell you that Beth Torah has established a dignity fund. And into that dignity fund, donations are flowing from people who have given because they appreciate the work we do, they appreciate the fact that we're here every Shabbat, they appreciate the fact that we're trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy under extraordinarily difficult times. And these aren't necessarily large amounts of money. Some are, some are not. But this money is designated exclusively to help retain people's dignity, whether it be food, rent, or the ability to be part of a community membership. As mentioned before, no one is going to be left behind. When you get a request to rejoin the shul, it means, tell us what we can do to help you. We want 100% return to our shul this year, regardless. And we recognize that not everyone is in the same position they were last year. And for those of you that were struggling last year, it's probably likely it's still going to be a challenge, and we're going to help with dignity. And thank you to all of you who have stepped up and recognized that your good fortune allows you to share with others. And we're going to ask every member who's in a position to help to either take on a sponsorship of a family who can't, or help support the shul in general, because we believe that more so than ever, there is evidence and absolute certainty that a synagogue is more than a building. It's more than the people who get together. It's the attitude and the opportunities that we bring to do good in the world as a group. And that hasn't changed. We're still a strong community, we know. We've talked to many of you. I've spoken to many of you directly, emailed, and as you know, every time we talk, it's the same thing. Nobody is doing okay, but we're all doing as well as we can. So remember the Dignity Fund. If you're in a position to help, we will. And if you're in a position to need, we will help. So we will be having high holidays this year. And we will be having high holidays in whatever format we're allowed to. We have absolutely no foreknowledge of what the rules will be for synagogues. There has been no relaxing of the rules. Synagogues and places of worship are closed. There is no minimal number of gathering. There is no gathering whatsoever. For all we know, this could be the same through the high holidays. We have absolutely no way of knowing. But what we do know is we're going to do everything in our power to bring you an extraordinary experience for high holidays, one that will make us feel and connect and laugh and cry and sing just like we always do. And it will be from here. We're hoping to bring you other content like we do in shul. If you've joined us for high holidays, you know that we have speakers, we have soloists, we have all kinds of things going on, and we're hoping to bring that to you as well. So membership is not only about whether you sit in a seat or not. We know that some of you are members here and don't come that often, and that's okay. And some of you come all the time. Some of you don't come for high holidays. You go elsewhere. You have other commitments. Some of you can't come. But you believe that belonging is greater than the need to have a seat, so to speak. It's about participating and feeling connected, which I hope we're doing for you. Stay tuned about the changes. We don't know, but what we do know is there will be an extraordinary high holiday service for you. And you know, I'm saying it because I know it's going to be so. We're going to make it so. Also, Beth Torah, together with Living Jewishly, will be presenting online content for the shul. And on our webpage now, there's an opportunity to register and get yourself in line to be able to get the news when we are up and running, which will be shortly. We do want to hear from you if you have any topic or something you'd like to hear about. I can't promise, of course, but certainly your ideas are welcome. And if you know someone who would like to share some thoughts and ideas with us, someone who has particular expertise, whatever it is, something interesting, unique, something different, something that will keep people's spirits up, something that is, an opportunity to learn something new, certainly let me know. I'd be more than happy to help. All of you in the congregation who have unique skills and talents and stories, I'm open. You never know. This might be the time where we can engage our community as well in these matters. Let's try to think of what people would like to hear or see during this time. It doesn't have to be on camera. It can also just be something people will listen to. So don't worry about your hair, or how you look, or how you feel on camera. It will be a conversation as well. But the learning opportunities are coming, and we want to hear from you for sure. Living Jewishly has launched an initiative. You can go to our page there and see it. We're together with Noshfest, a food festival in Toronto, a Jewish food festival. We've teamed up to provide United Bakers dairy meals to frontline workers. So if you're interested in doing that kind of work, by all means, please help us out. You know that 100% of whatever you give goes directly to meals for people who are working way above, way harder and way above normal circumstances. And they're doing it for us so that if we're sick, we know we have support. There are lots of conversations going on now, and the one that worries me the most is the conversation that sounds something like, how much longer can this go on? It can't. It's got to be over soon. And the worry I have is that people will start acting as if what they believe and what they want is what's real. And the truth is that while the messaging from government has started to change a little bit, it hasn't changed very much. And if you avoid the chatter news and you focus on news that is of substance, which probably means it's less news and more opinion-based by experts, you'll probably find out there's a long way to go. With that in mind, let's distract ourselves and talk about something completely ancient, but I say very relevant. So bear with me. In this week's portion, we come across kind of a cryptic statement. It says, Ish imo v'aviv tirau, you should fear your parents, or as I would interpret it, you should see your parents, see them. In other words, learn who they are and respect them for who they are, which is a lifetime of work. And then it goes on to say, what I find extraordinary, ve'et shabtotai tishmaru, and you shall observe my Shabbats, not Shabbat, my Shabbats, plural, more than one Shabbat. So some will tell you, yes, it's the Shabbat that was said with two formats, Zachor, remember, and Shamor, observe. But that's not really what the sentence says. What it says is, you should observe my Shabbats. It's like saying you should observe my holidays. They're each different, they're plural. And I want to suggest to all of us that in keeping with the original translation of the Midrash that says, there was a Shabbat that came about because of the creation of the world. And as if you can imagine creation being an entity, creation, the energy that goes into the world, comes to God, so to speak. It's imaginary, but comes to God and says, it's been 6 days of creation, or extrapolated into space-time, and 6 billion years we've been working to build the universe, and we're tired. We need a rest. And that is how the first Shabbat is born. It's born out of necessity. It's born out of consequence, of imminent collapse of the energy if you don't have a break. So the first Shabbat that is being referred to, observe my Shabbats, is the Shabbat, the original Shabbat, classic Shabbat, which was 6 days of effort, 1 day of rest. What's the second Shabbat? Well, I'm going to suggest that the second Shabbat changes over time. When we left Egypt and we formed as a nation and began the journey through the desert and ended up in the land of Israel and began our journey through life there, through the various upheavals, Shabbat there was pausing the agricultural work, pausing commerce, and so on. And once we were exiled, Shabbat represented a change from the societal norm where the rest of the world kept going and we paused, not necessarily in agriculture or not necessarily labor, but our entire entity of synagogue and Torah reading and all those new elements that I mentioned a few weeks ago came into force, and Shabbat became a day off, a celebration, a time not only not to work, but a time to engage in Torah study and family, and the whole notion of family time is different than the cessation of labor, because not everybody worked in a fashion that was exhausting. Or not everybody worked on a 6-day schedule. So Shabbat becomes its own entity. And then Shabbat goes on and becomes different things at different times. And we are in a situation now where we need to find and rediscover what Shabbat means. For people who are home all the time, for people who are not working all the time, for people, some of us who work a little bit or work sporadically, some of us will say we've lost the sense of time. Some people don't remember what day it is because the days kind of are similar. Some people, like us, when it was Passover during the week and then it was Shabbat, I had trouble adjusting to the fact that it was a Wednesday and then it was a Friday. It sort of put me off because I don't have a routine anymore in that fashion. So the second Shabbat I'm suggesting to you is the Shabbat that needs constant reimagination and rediscovery. You observe the Shabbat, which is about rest from the days of labor. And then there's the second Shabbat, where you create out of necessity. And our necessity now is to find a way to engage on a Shabbat. But the Shabbat that we create does not have to be on Shabbat Saturday. It can be on Wednesday. It could be on Sunday. It can be any day of the week. It can be any time. It can actually be in segments. In other words, it's about finding a routine and developing a routine. The ancient wisdom of finding a weekly routine still applies. We need to find some way to fill up our time, develop a routine so we have on and off time. And it's particularly relevant because I'm not making this up. It's going to be here for a long time, in one form or another. Second concept I want to talk about is what's happening this week on May 7th. May 7th is the 14th day of ER, the month of ER, which is exactly a month after the start of Passover. And I know it feels like Passover was a year ago. It feels like Purim was a decade ago. It feels like the high holidays was a century ago. It truly does. It feels like time has been expanded and compressed all at once. But the 7th of May is Pesach Sheni. It's known as the second Passover. Just like we talked about the 2 Shabbats, we're talking now about the 2 Passovers. The first Passover, which is the 14th of Nisan, is the night of the Seder, and that was the original date of Exodus. So how did we end up with 2 Passovers? Well, let me share with you. It's from the Book of Leviticus, and it's chapter 9, verse 1. And it is in the 2nd year of Exodus from the land of Egypt. It's the first month, which is Chodesh Nisan, which is the month in which Passover appears. And they do the Passover in the desert at its appointed time. The 14th day of the month, in the afternoon, they slaughter the Passover, and they eat the Passover at the Seder with the matzah, the whole thing they did. But in verse 6, here's the problem. There were people that had been made impure by contact with the dead. Either they had a funeral to attend, or they had somebody to bury, or they accidentally came in contact, or they were a funeral worker or something, and they were tameh. In order to be pure, you have to go through a 7-day purification ritual, kind of like a quarantine, where you isolate for 7 days to see whether you're healthy, or 14 days to see if you're healthy. In this case, 7 days, sprinkling the water and so on. It's a complicated process, but essentially they were unable to do it. And they are impure, but they want to participate in Pesach. And they come to Moses and Aaron and they say, "We are impure. And why should we lose out? Why should you create a law based on the festival in which we're all supposed to celebrate the Exodus and the opportunity to recreate our Exodus, and because of no fault of our own, really, we're excluded?" And Moses, to his credit, says, "Okay, fair. Let me go talk to God, so to speak." And a new law is created. If you were impure because of death, or even better, the law goes further than expected. If you were in a remote place, if you were too far away, you tried, you couldn't get there, you have an extra month. You have an extra month in which you can wait and celebrate Passover in its entirety, the full Megillah, so to speak, a month later. You know, when you look at religion and you ask yourself, what does religion do? This is what it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to say who's excluded. It's supposed to say, we will find a way to include you. And that is how we have 2 Pesachs. I remember in my lunch on the 14th of ER, a month after Passover, there would be a piece of shmura matzah that my mother had saved, and we all ate matzah on the 14th of ER. So this year, I'm going to ask you all, if you don't have matzah, it's okay. But if you do, and probably some of you have leftovers, on the 14th of ER, May 7th, we're going to eat matzah. You know why? We are making a statement, especially now, that our duty is to find ways to include, not exclude. And if you missed out, think of all the celebrations that have had to be delayed. So what should we say? You didn't have your bar bat mitzvah on its appointed day, you're done. No, your birthday, we're waiting. There will be a second chance. We all deserve it. Not only do we all deserve it, our tradition teaches us that we have the right to demand it. And that is what creates the notion of Shabbat, the schedule. We have the right to retain a schedule. We have the right to look forward to celebrations. And even if we are unable to. So I would say that the 14th of Iyar, if you are a frontline worker and you were working during the Seder, which many of you were, or you were busy, or you were taking care of someone, and Passover was the last thing on your mind, or, as a matter of fact, for any life cycle moment that you missed, the 14th day of Iyar is when we reclaim it. So eating that little bit of matzah is a way of saying religion does not have the right to create exclusions. Its primary role is to create inclusion. When we're talking about Passover and Shabbat, which is the counting of days, everything's about counting days and time. 6 days on, 1 day off. 14 Nisan, 14 Iyar. There's something that happens during Passover, and is still happening today, that is very unique. And that is we have a 49-day festival of counting. It's called Sfirah, in which we count the Omer. What do we count? We count towards the ancient sacrifice of the first harvest, barley, wheat, so on, the first crop. So it was an agricultural festival. You take the festival of Passover, which is about our history. You take the present, which is about agriculture and hope for a good season. And we combine them, and 49 days after the second day of Pesach, starting from the second day, we have a festival called Shavuot, which is the festival of weeks. We are literally counting the weeks. And if you're a traditional observant Jew, you will every day make a blessing who commanded us regarding counting the Omer. And you will say, today is 21 days. That are 3 weeks to the counting of the Omer, until you get to 49, and then there's the celebration of Shavuot, that all-night learning festival, cheesecake, the whole story. We'll get to that. Not today, but we'll talk about it, I'm sure. So we're in the festival of counting in terms of our tradition, but the whole world is in a festival of counting right now. We're counting 14 days of quarantine to make sure we don't have disease. We're not part of the pandemic. We then count days of recovery, approximately 5 weeks. We're counting towards the reopening, which we don't really have a date for. We're all in a counting mode. We're all in a mode in which counting has become a way of life. We're counting the number of dead. We count the number of ill. We count the number of recovered. We have a whole new festival of counting, and it's not all pleasant. And I don't want to harp every week on how challenging the moment is, but I do need to share some wisdom with you about the counting that we're doing. And it's something I learned. It's actually an extraordinary CBC News opinion piece by Maxwell Smith, Ross Upshur, and James Downer. This was April 29th for the CBC. And they wanted to teach us about something extraordinarily important, so you understand what the thinking is around where we're at in our counting moment. So they teach us one of the simplest and oldest approaches to modeling infectious diseases. Those of us who know nothing about this know nothing about this, but we're learning a lot, and we're often confusing what we learn, and we're seeing them as interchangeable, and they're not necessarily. So let's start with something very basic. It's called SIR, like as in sir. Good morning, sir. Good day, sir. Sir. What is the sir model? S represents the number of those people who are susceptible to infection. I represents the number of those people who are currently infected, and R represents the combined number of those who have recovered from infection. So how many people in Canada have recovered? We kind of have a count, assuming we have the correct numbers. How many people are infected? We have a count. Do you know how many people are susceptible? The answer is, if we assume that people who have had it are no longer infectious or can no longer get infected. Let's assume that's the case, because that's not guaranteed. Remember that, that's not guaranteed. But if we assume that those who have had it are off the grid now, they're not part of S, they're no longer susceptible. If that's the case, you know what that means? That means that 90% of Canadians are still susceptible. This is what happens when you close down society. You lower infection. With great medical care, you make higher the rate of recovery. But the susceptibility is still there, which means that most of us did not get this, but we don't know what's going to happen when we start easing the restrictions and opening it up again. We're all, unless you know you've had it and you're no longer infectious and you can't get reinfected, which we don't know. That could mean that in theory, we're still at 100% susceptibility. But certainly we're at least at around 90%. Probably 99% of Canadians did not have COVID. Which actually is not a very comforting number. Because if you want to think about the idea of herd immunity, it means that most people have to get it. It has to run through society openly. Whoever gets it and dies, they die. Whoever doesn't get it, good for you. Without testing to know who had it and who didn't, without knowing whether you develop antibodies that prevent you from getting it again, and without a treatment or a vaccine, we're all susceptible and we're all at risk. Now you know why we have to proceed with caution. So when people start talking about what they imagine should be, it's still not a perfect solution. Nobody is suggesting that reopening bits and pieces of the economy are necessarily going to be a safe thing. And it's entirely possible that there's community transmission again because people are relaxed and we get locked down even more severely than we are now. But I'm not a pessimist. I'm extraordinarily proud of the way Canada has responded, and Ontario specifically. And we think that we're in good hands for the most part. Not perfect, but good. Because remember, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Let's focus on the good rather than the perfect right now. But let's remember SIR. If you can guarantee you are not susceptible, good for you. If you're not infectious, you're lucky. If recovered, you got a gift. But if you are susceptible, be careful. We're discovering that young people have different symptoms. There are other symptoms we didn't know about that are starting to be revealed. Now, maybe they'll be disproven, but maybe not. It's brand new. In the life of a virus, this is extraordinarily young. It could take years and years to find vaccines. We're hopeful that with the acceleration and the desire of the globe to find something, there will be an answer soon. But without the ability to test quickly, without the ability to treat quickly, we're all susceptible. That's why we're counting. We're counting in many ways now. We're counting days that we've been at home. We're counting days that we've lost our jobs. We're counting days in which we've had our pay cut. We're counting days in which we will run out of money, out of food, out of energy, out of mental strength. We're counting. We're also counting on people. How long can they last at the front lines? How long can people be expected to go and risk their lives daily for other people? The answer is I have faith in them. We support them. Yesterday was an official day in support of doctors. Deserve all the credit. All the people who have stepped up, and all of you know who you are. You all know somebody who stepped up way beyond their measure. You should be acknowledging them. So we're in a counting mode, but we don't actually know what we're counting to. It's almost like we're counting from as opposed to counting to. We're counting from the last Shabbat, meaning when the world was normal and there was 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, and now it's 1 day of work and 6 days of rest. We want to get back to the next normal Shabbat time in our lives, the normal time where we're used and we're spent and then we relax and then we go back and we work again. We want to go back to the original Shabbat. We don't want to create this artificial Shabbat in which we have to develop artificial structure in our lives. And most of us are doing that. And it's taxing. So I used to think that Sphira, counting the Omer, wasn't really cool. It was like, so what? And then people came along, and of course they made it Kabbalistic, where you develop these spiritual dimensions, 49 dimensions, 49 ways to get closer to God, whatever. That's certainly not going to interest me. So what else was there? There was also 49 ways to self-help and inspiration. Great stuff. 49, 49, 49. Everything's 49. But the idea of saying a blessing to count a day, okay. But then I had an experience in Israel, I think it was, 5 years ago maybe. And I was at the Western Wall the night of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of Av, which is usually July or August, and it's a day in which there's a traditional mourning for the destruction of the temples and various tragedies in Jewish life. You can do research on Tisha B'Av. A lot of bad things happened around that time. And there's a service that goes on in synagogues where people actually sit on the floor with candles and read the Book of Lamentations with a special tune that is quite sad. The Book of Lamentations about the destruction of the temple and destruction of a people. And people are still commemorating this every year as if it just happened. If you walked in, you would think you are back in history and some terrible tragedy has just befallen the people, and they're sitting on the floor with torn clothing and candles, crying. And that's what goes on around the world. And at the Western Wall, of course, you have to imagine, just like everything else in Israel, especially at the Western Wall, it's a confluence of everything just in bigger and more powerful mode. And I came across something. I was walking with some colleagues across the plaza in front of the Western Wall, and I heard something I had never heard before in my life. There was a man sitting on the floor with a candle, wearing basically what looked like sackcloth, like in the ancient tradition of mourning, and he started to sing a blessing. And it sounded very much like the blessing we use for the Omer, for counting the 49 days. And it goes, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God, Lord of the universe, who commanded us, Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, who commanded us with his obligations, Al Sfirat Churban Beit Hamikdash, who commanded us to recite a blessing about the destruction of the temple. And then he says, Hayom, and this is in a Sephardic incantation. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's lamenting, it's sad, and he's weeping. And he says in Hebrew, today is 1,945 years from the destruction of the temple. And then a prayer. May the merciful one restore us to a completely rebuilt Jerusalem speedily in our days. And I'd never heard anybody count from the destruction of the temple. 1,945 years, a lot of counting. But as I was thinking about today, I was thinking that we need both blessings. We need a blessing that says we're counting towards something. We're counting towards the unknown, actually, because we don't know, nobody knows really where this is going. But we are also counting from something, which is, in some ways, the destruction overnight of so much of what we built. Whether it was frivolous or important that we built, or it was worthy or silly, whether it was valid or just hot air, doesn't matter. The fact is, we built our lives on a certain construct. We built our own temples, and then they were destroyed. The temple in Jerusalem that was destroyed by the Romans stood from 516 BCE to 70 CE, which is a total of 585 years. And can you imagine what happens when something that has stood for 585 years and been the focal point of people's lives, whether they were right or wrong about it, whether the cult of killing animals was the right way to go, whether it was a good idea to have the only central part of Judaism in Jerusalem. There were a lot of problems with Jerusalem and the temple, but after 585 years, institutions have challenges. But when it was destroyed, whether you agreed with everything or whether it was entirely good or not, it didn't matter. What really mattered is our core, our center, was shattered. And we all had to remake our lives in some way or another. And that is why I'm hoping that on May 7th, you'll eat a piece of matzah to remind us that our tradition has thought about these things. It has thought that there are more than one ways to celebrate Shabbat. There's normal Shabbat, healthy Shabbat, and then there's extraordinary circumstance Shabbat, which we have to make ourselves. There's counting towards something good. There's also counting away from something bad. And to me, it all comes together when we eat that piece of matzah and say, our tradition teaches us we all get a second chance. As people, as families, as societies. Actually, it's not that we're getting a second chance. It's that we're going to need a second chance. We're all going to need it. Some of us have lost our fortunes, our jobs, our mental health. People will lose their homes. People lose their businesses. It's extraordinary to watch the cascade and confluence of events that are unimaginable and unpredictable. And if, in fact, this does not end soon, which I understand why we want it to end soon, we're all going to need second and third chances, undoubtedly. Whatever we thought of our lives till today, whatever we were counting to, we also have to start counting from. And somewhere in the middle, we're going to find who we really are. It bothers me tremendously that there are people that are inconsiderate. It bothers me that there are people who are inconsiderate and expect that others around them don't mind. It bothers me that people share false news. It bothers me that people put their own needs ahead of other people. And I just want to share a short little anecdote to illustrate what bothers me. Imagine you're on a beautiful wooden boat. You're on a cruise. It's a small cruise. It's a barefoot yacht. And it's old, it's classic, it's made out of huge beams of wood. And there you are in the lower deck of the boat. You can hear the water splashing against the bow of the boat. It's beautiful. You feel the rhythm of the water. You're basically under the water in the cabin. And it's a small boat. I mean, small relative to a big ship. And there's you and a couple other people, and then there's a guy there who's on the journey with you, and he pulls out a power drill. And he says, is there an outlet around here? And yeah, over there. And you go, what are you doing? He pulls out a power drill, and it's got a 24-inch bit on it, the kind that they drill through your wall to bring your cable into your home. And you go, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm drilling a hole in the boat. I want to be close to the water. And they go, you don't drill a hole in a boat. We're going to sink. He goes, listen, you paid for your space. I paid for mine. You do whatever you want in your space. I'll do whatever I want in mine. Which is absurd. It's like someone who decides they're going to open their window on an airplane. So the absurdity of what is contemplated by other people, and then they expect that because they have the right to exist, or their individuality, or their freedoms, whatever it is that they want, whatever they're expressing, that they have the right to sink the whole boat. No. So I had a story this week where we had to make a decision what to do about someone who was in flagrant violation of guidelines, health guidelines. And the answer ultimately was, despite this person's hesitation, call the health department and you call the police. It involved somebody trying to rent space in a home, walking in without protective equipment, and there were other tenants in the home, and just bringing someone who was at risk into the home, like just some extraordinary flagrant. That's what inspired me to think about the idea that somebody is just exercising their own rights without regard to anyone else around them. Let's wait and see what we're told. And let's not rush, because as hard as it might seem today, we're still counting towards something. And we'll enjoy every little bit of freedom. And we'll be different. And we will be changed. It's not like it was when we first started talking, where we said, let's use this time to become something else. This time will make us something else, whether we like it or not. We don't have a lot of control over how much time, but we do have some over what we make us. That's why, from day one, we focused on providing a live stream Shabbat that is engaging. At least, I hope so. I've heard from a lot of people, and I'm grateful for all the feedback, and I really, truly appreciate it. But I didn't start immediately, as soon as this hit us, with overdoing the online learning and the Zoom and starting to layer on massive amounts of content. We have a captive audience finally. They need us. They can't come here. We'll go to them. Look how easy. We get rid of the whole interface, the whole question of membership and money. We go right from here to them. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure everybody was healthy first, and safe and secure, and had a Passover Seder, and had somewhere to go, so to speak, and had a Seder plate, and knows they're supported, and knows they're loved, and know that they have an absolute open channel for help. That was my first and our first priority. But now, we're settling in. We're counting from destruction to hope. We don't know how long it's going to be, so we're going to start offering more. I hope you join us for that more, because that is what's going to sustain us, that and many other wonderful ventures that are out there right now. Two things define you: your patience when you have nothing, and your attitude when you have everything. Those two things will define you. Your patience when you have nothing, and your attitude when you have everything. We are now in a time where those are switched. We need to have patience, and we need to look at our attitudes, because many of us have nothing, and many of us will find a way to have everything. And as I said, don't blame it on the sunshine, don't blame it on the moonlight, don't blame it on the good times, blame it on the you. Everyone has to be responsible for what's going on.